Today we begin the second part of this course. The first part of the course, as you may recall, dealt with the evolution of different human species, with the cognitive revolution, and with the life and deeds of our sapiens forefathers from the cognitive revolution to the agricultural revolution tens of thousands of years ago. We explained the unique advantages that sapiens gained over all the other human species and all the other animals thanks to the development of its unique language and cognitive abilities. We then surveyed the daily life of ancient hunter-gatherers tens of thousands of years ago and the huge impact that they had upon the world ecology, upon animals and plants and so forth. And a central message which I try to convey is that history begins with the cognitive revolution and not with agriculture or with writing. Sapiens, who lived 30,000 years ago, already looked and thought and felt just like us. They were probably as intelligent, as curious, and as sensitive as we are. They probably had their own share of religious revolutions, artistic movements, and political struggles. We don't know much about these events, due mainly to the lack of evidence. We don't have much evidence from those periods, but that does not mean that such things did not happen back then. Another central message that I try to convey in the first part of this course is that the lives of our hunter-gatherer ancestors were in many respects better than the lives of their descendants, the peasants and workers that appeared after the agricultural revolution. This raises the question, if things were so good at the time of the hunter-gatherers, why did the agricultural revolution happen? In this lesson, we will try to answer this question. We will then proceed to explore the many influences that the transition from hunting and gathering to agriculture had upon human societies and upon the surrounding world. For the first 2.5 million years of their existence, humans managed very well without agriculture. They fed themselves by gathering plants and by hunting animals that lived and bred without much human intervention. Homo erectus, Homo ergaster, and the Neanderthals, they plucked wild figs from the trees and they hunted wild sheep, but without trying to control the lives of figs or the lives of sheep. Humans back then didn't decide where fig trees would grow, or in which area the herd of sheep would go to graze, or which ram would mate with which goat. For tens of thousands of years, Homo sapiens too, even after the cognitive revolution, did not control the lives of other animals and plants. Homo sapiens did many things. It spread from East Africa to the Middle East, and then to Europe and to Asia, and finally to Australia and to America. But everywhere that Homo sapiens went, Homo sapiens continued to live like humans millions of years previously by gathering wild plants and by hunting wild animals without trying to control them directly. All this changed about 12,000 years ago when sapiens began to devote almost all their time and effort to manipulating the lives of a few animal and plant species like wheat or potatoes or chickens and cows. From sunrise to sunset, humans sowed seeds and watered plants and plucked weeds from the ground and led sheep to pastures, shepherded sheep and goats and cows. This work, humans thought, would provide them with more fruit and more grain and more meat. So this is why they devoted so much time to it. And this movement from hunting and gathering to investing more and more time in controlling the lives and production of plants and animals, this was an unprecedented revolution in the way that humans lived, and we call this revolution the agricultural revolution, the revolution of the transition to agriculture. This transition from a life of hunting and gathering to a life of controlling and cultivating plants and animals occurred for the first time around 9000 BC or 9500 BC in the hill country of southeastern Turkey, western Iran, and the Levant. Scholars once believed that agriculture began only in this area in the Middle East, and from there spread all around the world, to Europe and Asia and so forth, from a single center. But this theory is no longer accepted. Today, scholars agree that agriculture sprang up in several different parts of the world independently of the agricultural revolution in the Middle East. People in Central America, in China, in New Guinea, and in several other places domesticated plants and animals without knowing anything about what was happening, what happened previously in the Middle East. Why did the agricultural revolution, or these different agricultural revolutions, erupt in those few places, the Middle East, China, Central America, and New Guinea, and not in other places like Australia or Alaska or South Africa? The short answer why agriculture began in a few places and not in other places is that most species of plants and animals are simply not good candidates for domestication. Of the thousands of species that our ancestors hunted and gathered, only very, very few were suitable candidates for domestication, for farming and herding. Those few species lived in particular areas like the Middle East and Central America, and this is why the agricultural revolutions began there and not in other places. So this is the short answer. If you're interested in the long answer, why exactly these types of species are suitable for domestications and other types are not, I recommend that you read a wonderful book called Guns, Germs, and Steel, written by Jared Diamond. And in this book, Diamond explains exactly what makes a plant or an animal suitable for domestication, and he also describes in great detail the actual process of the rise of agriculture. Scholars once proclaimed that the agricultural revolution not only began in a single place, the Middle East, but another main claim, another main argument was that the agricultural revolution was a great leap forward for humankind. People used to argue that evolution gradually produced over the centuries and millennia more and more intelligent people. As people became more intelligent, this is what was the explanation for the agricultural revolution, that as people became more intelligent, more smart, they were able to understand better how plants and how animals reproduce, and this enabled people to start taming and controlling sheep and goats and chickens and wheat and potatoes and so forth. And as soon as this occurred, as soon as people discovered how they could control sheep and potatoes and wheat, people cheerfully, gladly abandoned the difficult and dangerous life of hunter-gatherers and settled down to enjoy the pleasant and much easier life of farmers. This is what many people used to think a few decades ago, and even today many people who are not familiar with the recent advances in science, they still believe this tale, this story. But this story is total fantasy. There is no evidence that people became more intelligent around the time of the agricultural revolution. Foragers, hunter-gatherers, they knew the secrets of nature, how plants and animals reproduce. They knew that long before the agricultural revolution, because their survival as hunters and gatherers, depended on intimate knowledge of the animals they hunted and of the plants which they gathered and ate. So there is no, it's completely wrong to think that the agricultural revolution began because people became smarter and discovered things about animals and plants that they didn't know before. Similarly, and more importantly, it is a mistake to think that the transition from hunting and gathering to agriculture was something that improved human standards of living, that peasants had a better life than their forager ancestors. As we saw in the third lesson, compared with the lives of most peasants, the ancient hunter-gatherers enjoyed a better life. They enjoyed a healthier diet, they worked fewer hours, and they spent their time doing much more interesting things than the peasants. Also, they were less in danger of starvation, of disease, and probably even less in danger of human violence. So the agricultural revolution, it certainly enlarged, as we shall see shortly, it certainly enlarged the sum total of food at the disposal of humankind, but all this extra food did not translate into a better diet or a better life. Rather, all this extra food that agriculture brought to Homo sapiens was translated into a demographic explosion, many more people than before, and also into pampered elites. Kings and noblemen and priests and so forth, they ate all the extra food. The average peasant in the small village, he or she worked harder than the average forager thousands of years previously, and they got in return a worse diet. The agricultural revolution, from this perspective, turns out to be the biggest fraud in history. Now, who exactly was responsible for this fraud? It wasn't kings, and it wasn't priests, and it wasn't noblemen or merchants who were responsible for the fraud, for the agricultural revolution. The real culprits were a handful of plant species, such as wheat and rice and potatoes. These plants domesticated Homo sapiens for their advantage rather than vice versa. Now, this sounds outrageous, but think for a moment, try to think about the agricultural revolution from the perspective, from the viewpoint of wheat and of potatoes and of rice, rather than from the viewpoint of humans. Think about it from the viewpoint of wheat. 10,000 years ago, wheat was just one type of wild grass, not very important, one of many wild grasses that grew in some small areas in the Middle East. Suddenly, within just a few short millennia, you find wheat growing all over the world. If you go back 10,000 years ago and then start looking what's happening afterwards, you see that wheat is spreading very, very rapidly from a few selected areas in the Middle East all over the world, to America and Australia and Europe and Africa and so forth. According to the basic evolutionary criteria of survival and reproduction, wheat, over the last 10,000 years, has become, from an insignificant weed, it has become one of the most successful plants in the history of planet Earth. If, for example, you go to North America, to the big plains of North America, of today's USA and Canada, 10,000 years ago, you go around Kansas or Iowa or Manitoba in Canada, you don't find there a single wheat plant. There was no wheat in North America 10,000 years ago. But if you go now, today, the 21st century, to North America, to Canada and the USA, you can walk for hundreds upon hundreds of kilometers without encountering anything except wheat. No trees and no animals and not even houses, just fields upon fields of wheat. How exactly did wheat do it? How come it now covers about 2.25 million square kilometers of the globe's surface, almost 10 times the size of the island of Britain, when 10,000 years ago it grew just in a few small places in the Middle East? How did it turn wheat from being insignificant to being ubiquitous everywhere? Wheat did it by manipulating Homo sapiens. This ape, Homo sapiens, had been living a pretty comfortable life, hunting and gathering until about 10,000 years ago, and then it suddenly began investing more and more time and effort in cultivating wheat, in helping wheat, so that within quite a short time, a couple of centuries or millennia, humans in many parts of the world were doing almost nothing from dawn until sunset other than taking care of wheat and helping wheat to spread itself over the world. For example, wheat didn't like rocks and pebbles in the fields because it hampered the growth of the wheat plants. So Homo sapiens broke their backs going to the fields and taking all these rocks and all these pebbles and throwing them out of the field to clear space for wheat. Similarly, wheat didn't like sharing its water, its food, its nutrient in the ground with other plants. So men and women labored very hard for many days and weeks, weeding other plants, taking them out of the field, leaving only wheat to monopolize the water and the nutrients and the sunshine. Wheat was also defenseless against all kinds of organisms that liked to eat it, like worms and locusts and rabbits and deer. So humans spent also a lot of effort to protect wheat. They built fences, they killed the rabbits, they threw away the worms and the locusts to protect the wheat. Wheat was still thirsty and hungry for water and nutrients. So humans again broke their backs and their legs many hours each day just carrying water from springs and from streams to the field, or to dig wells and to take water from the well to water the wheat. And similarly, they collected feces of animals and of themselves to spread over the field and to nourish the ground, nourish the earth. Now, the body of Homo sapiens did not evolve for such kind of tasks. Homo sapiens and other humans, for millions of years, their body was adapted to climbing apple trees and picking apples, or to running after gazelles and rabbits in the forest. The human body is not adapted to all this back-breaking toil, to all this clearing rocks and weeding the field and carrying water buckets from the river or from the wells. And the human body, the human spine, human knees, human necks, paid for all this effort with a very high price. We have a lot of evidence from ancient skeletons that archaeologists have found that indicate very clearly that the transition from a life of hunting and gathering to a life of agriculture brought about many new problems and ailments, such as slip discs and backaches and arthritis and hernias and so forth. Moreover, all these new agricultural tasks, like watering the field and clearing and protecting the field, they demanded so much time from people that people were forced to settle permanently next to the wheat field. And this completely changed their way of life. From nomadic foragers, humans turned into peasants living in a village in one place. We say often that we humans domesticated wheat, but in fact, it is wheat that domesticated us. The word to domesticate, it comes from the Latin word domus. Domus means house. So to domesticate somebody means to make him live in a house. Now, who is the one living in houses? Who is the one that was domesticated? It's not wheat. Wheat is still growing in the fields. It's sapiens that has been domesticated. How did wheat actually do it? How did wheat convince Homo sapiens to exchange a rather good and relatively pleasant life of hunting and gathering for a much more difficult existence of living as peasants? What did wheat offer Homo sapiens in return? We will try to answer this question of what wheat offered Homo sapiens in exchange for all the many different things that Homo sapiens did for it. We'll try to answer this in the next segment.